And with that, let's get started. Hunt, why don't you just jump on in?
Oh, great. Oh, thanks so much. I was so excited when Sherry sent me an invitation to be with this group and to have this conversation because I'll say a little bit more about the study I was in, but I'll say probably some significant amount more about it. But almost immediately after I was in the psilocybin study, almost 10 years ago now at Johns Hopkins, there were a couple things that I just sort of knew intuitively would be an important part of the conversation. One was that spiritual direction would be really, it had been so important to me in my formation as not just as a clergy person, but as a priest, like now 25 years of spiritual direction, which I think left me very well prepared for the experience I had. So I think maybe the next day after my first session at Hopkins, I thought there's really going to be a growth opportunity for the ministry of spiritual direction in this, almost as if spiritual directors would be the equivalent of clinicians in the psychological therapeutic realm. And that's actually proven to be really true. And look, the organization I started 4 years ago, that's one of the most important and significant things we've done is lift up spiritual directors and create spiritual direction groups and introduce spiritual direction to a lot of people that didn't know about it. So that was one thing that I really had a light bulb moment about. The other was process theology, which I had not had. I'd done a little bit of reading in seminary. I was second career and I graduated from seminary in 2005 and I read some process theology in seminary. And then I got to my first job out of seminary. My first church position was at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Noonan, Georgia. And somewhere early on, maybe reading something about John Cobb, I came across the fact that that's where he went to high school. And we were just talking about that when I first got on, that he'd been, of course, a missionary family. And I suspect his family had some connection to Noonan, which is about 50 miles south of Atlanta. There's a big Methodist church there. And he'd gone to high school there and then went on to Emory and then taught at Young Harris, which is in North Georgia. So just a little bit of a connection. I remember thinking, what would that be like to get John Cobb to come back to Noonan and do a conference? And I was there for 3 years and that just never happened. But I just always thought that was a kind of a cool little synchronicity or coincidence. So let me back up from that and tell you just how I ended up at this intersection of Christianity and psychedelics. And I'll tell you a little bit about the organization I started. And as I was telling Sherry, I really want this to be a robust conversation because I've got a pretty good sense of psychedelics and the intersection with Christianity and some sense of process thought, but it's not the strongest area. I think process theology and liberation theology were the two things that I was introduced to in seminary that resonated the most with me from my own background and my own work. So to learn more about process thought and to hear from you all about that would be very beneficial to me in the work I'm doing. So I hope we can have a mutual conversation. So about this time of year, it was in October of 2015, so 10 years ago, I was serving an Episcopal church in the Seattle area, Emmanuel Episcopal Church on Mercer Island. And I was at home flipping through Christian Century magazine. And I saw an ad for a study and also an article about the research at Hopkins and about this study, looking for religious professionals from all the world's religious traditions who would be a participant in the research that Hopkins was doing in conjunction with NYU around mental health, depression, anxiety, PTSD, addiction, fear of dying. And they were realizing that people were having profound religious and spiritual experiences. So Bill Richards, who's on the call, and Tony Bossis, and maybe a couple other people, but they were the main two that really were pushing for this study to include religious professionals. Sort of a redo of the 1962 Good Friday experiment, which involved only Christian clergy and psilocybin at Marsh Chapel at Boston University, to redo that with certainly with other religious traditions and maybe with some better science, because now we were 50 years along in the process. Hopkins had picked the research back up in 2000. And so I applied for that study thinking there is no way in hell I'm going to get in, because who would not want to do that? And it turns out it was really hard to fill up the study in 2016, 2015. This was before Michael Pollan's book had come out, How to Change Your Mind. And there was just still a lot of, especially in Christian circles, not a lot of awareness of the research. I think Pollan's book did change, and the documentary did change that a lot. It was a different conversation after 2018. But at that point in 2015, there I knew a little bit about the research. I had never done psilocybin or any other psychedelic. There were two requirements. One was to be a religious professional in an actual religious setting, so check, and psychedelically naive, check. I've been around it. I didn't have any moral issues with it. I'd been around it in college and later, and it just didn't grab me or didn't grab my attention. And I'm glad, because at 51, which is how old I was when I was in that study, it was right on schedule for me. I was at a kind of a rough spot in my ministry. I was, there was some stuff going on in my family with some health issues, and we were 3,000 miles from our support system in the Southeast. And I was just in a kind of a tight spot. I'd been there about 7.5 years. And so I couldn't believe that researchers at Johns Hopkins and NYU really cared what clergy thought about anything. I'll just have to be honest. That was as much to me as anything. Is like, they care. They really want to know what we think. That sounds kind of silly in some ways, but that's really what I thought. And it seemed like an adventure. So I applied. I was invited to come for an interview. I met Bill Richards, who's on the call, and several other people at Hopkins, including Roland Griffiths and Mary Casamano, and was accepted into the study. And then 3 months later, I was back at Hopkins with my first of 2 doses of psilocybin, medium high dose of psilocybin. And I didn't have any preconceived ideas. I had not read Bill's book, even though I knew Bill had written a book. I wanted to go in as sort of unaware as I could be. I was just totally open, which was the advice from Bill and the others, to be open. And I was, just to see what happened and what would happen. And I had 2 sessions a month apart. I had, as a lot of people say, 2 of the most profound spiritual experiences of my life. The first one involved what I think was a Kundalini awakening, which was also a sense of the presence of the Holy Spirit in my body in very dramatic ways, very dramatic. And one of the things I took away from that is, for God's sake, man, please pay attention to your body. It's telling you everything you need to know. And I was sort of disconnected from my body at that point and was trying to figure out everything up here. I sort of forgotten this, my heart, and sort of forgotten my body, is also 2 very important ways of knowing, not just this. So that was one of my big takeaways from that. And that the Spirit, to use Christian language, that the Holy Spirit is active, always active in the world, active in our bodies. Paul's phrase that the body's a temple of the Holy Spirit took on a completely new meaning for me after that experience. So 6 hours, lots of things happened, but the crux of it was that embodied experience of energy moving through my body. And that next morning after that, that's when I realized that there was such a deep connection to, as a Christian, to the Christian tradition, to Christian spiritual practices, to spiritual direction. It seemed so obvious to me. A month later, I'm back at Hopkins, and this experience began in a similar way, sort of colors and shapes and images, and with such incredible support from the team at Hopkins, such interest in me and my work and my experiences. I've never quite felt so cared for and seen and appreciated as I was in those 2 sessions at Hopkins and through the people I met there. So I'm back, and I get up to go to the bathroom, because if you use psilocybin, you know that you wouldn't want to drive a car, but you can get up, and if you need to go to the bathroom, you can. And so I got up and did that, and I made a joke like, basically, is it going to be as dramatic as it was last time? Because it wasn't. And I got back down on the sofa, put my eye shades on, put the headsets on, and almost immediately this same sort of strong energetic force was moving through my body. And at one point I was on my stomach. I was sort of prostrate on the couch, on the sofa there. And somewhere in the middle of all that, I had been rocking like this in prayer. And in the state I was in, I remembered seeing Jewish men praying that way, rocking. Well, that's interesting. And then I got on my stomach because I was uncomfortable. I just was having really trouble getting comfortable. then my head was on the sofa, and I, of course, remembered seeing Muslims being participants in a mosque and watching and being with Muslim men as they prayed, and their heads on the. And then I remember my own ordination to the priesthood in the Episcopal Church, and in the liturgy in the Episcopal Church, you can either kneel in front of the bishop and the altar, or you can prostrate yourself in front of the altar. And for whatever reason, I just wasn't quite ready to do that. It's really an act of submission, and it's a beautiful act of submission. But I was still a little jumpy or something about that, which is interesting now to think about that and what's happened in the last month with my ordination as I've given that up. But I remember my ordination, and I remember that I knelt. I didn't lie flat on my stomach. And at some point in that process, I thought my ordination is being completed at the feet of the universe. And now I think I would expand that to say it's been expanded at the feet of the universe. I don't think my ordination was complete as it was at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Newnan, Georgia, in August of 2005. But fast forward to my time at Hopkins in 2016, and something shifted, something expanded in me. I did not lose any sense of my own Christianity. I didn't, and I've always sort of had an expansive theology. But I knew that those experiences connected me to something not disconnected from my Christian practice and experience, but in some ways beyond it, and encompassing it, but beyond it. So that's 2016. That's in March, the second session. I get back from that experience, and a friend has sent me a job posting for a church in Savannah, Georgia. And my son, I have one son at that time, he was about to be a senior, which is not the best time to move anyone. But I read the job. This is relevant to really my psilocybin experience. I read the profile of that position, and I thought, oh my God, this job is like, I'm a good fit for it. And that seems like be a good fit for me. I had such clarity, which I think is another thing that psilocybin can do. And I know it did certainly for me the first couple of times. I had such clarity about myself, about what I was called to do, what I was called to be. And I didn't have some of that doubt that I've always I've always questioned myself. And I saw that job profile, and I thought, oh my God, if I put in for this, I'm gonna get it, which is not really ever anything I ever think about jobs. And I of course checked with my then spouse, my wife then, and I checked with my son, and he said, yeah, Dad, I'm ready. So because he was going to go to school in the Southeast at Swanee. So anyway, I put in for it, I got it, and ended up at St. Peter's Episcopal Church in Savannah, which was a wonderful experience. And I was there almost 5 years. And in November of 2020, middle of COVID, at the peak of COVID in El Paso, I flew to El Paso to meet a friend and was going to do a retreat in the desert. And I did a retreat in the desert. And I didn't come to that retreat with any plan to leave my position. I just wanted to figure out a little bit more about where my work was going to be in psychedelics, because I knew after that first experience that it was going to change my ministry completely, or not completely, but it was going to change my ministry in dramatic ways. I just knew it would, because it changed my sense of Christian practice. It changed my sense of, it expanded my theology. It expanded my ecclesiology. It really affected everything in pretty dramatic ways. So this is 5 years after the experience. I'm in the desert in Marfa, and then at Big Bend National Park on a retreat. And over the course of a day, it occurred to me that there needed to be some space, a big space, for Christians to learn about psychedelics, and for the psychedelic community to learn about what I think is the best and most healing part of Christianity, which is the mystical, contemplative, sort of non-dual Christianity that Richard Rohr and Ilia Delio and mystics down through the centuries have talked about. And so I knew there needed to be that space, and I just wish somebody would have I remember thinking, I wish somebody would start this. And then I realized, well, I don't think there's anybody else to start this but me. So I came back from that retreat and made some phone calls to some funder people that I had just gotten to know in the fortunately in the just in some of the conversations I've been having, and was able to start a Christian Psychedelic Society. And I have a background in marketing. I worked for Delta Airlines in marketing before I went to seminary in my early 30s. I worked for an advertising agency. And one of the things that I worked on was naming companies and organizations and products. And so my first job was to name this thing that I didn't even know what it was. So I played around with a lot of words and names, and I remembered from Greek that from New Testament Greek that ligare is to bind or unite. It's the root word of religion. Religare really is religion to rebind. And as I say, ligare.org was available. And that's really the main sign I needed from the gods. And so in April of 21, I left my church position here in Savannah and full time moved into this space of finding the common ground between the Christian tradition and Christian leaders and lay people and people that used to be Christian and people that might want to be Christian, and this incredible psychedelic experience in the community that was in that realm. And so I just started going to psychedelic conferences, and I did basic community organizing, which I'd had some experience with, and just did a ton of one-on-one meetings. And then we started doing these little online Zoom, little house meeting things where I would just get a small group of people together. And that was in April of 21. And I had no idea. This is something we could talk about in process maybe a little bit. I had no idea really where it was going. I was building the plane as we were flying it, and had now this time I'd known the people at Hopkins for 5 years and not been really in touch with them. But at that point, after I decided to start this, I got in touch with them and just let them know what I was doing. And and then I started meeting the other people in the study. And once I popped my head up because of RIFRA, but not because of RIFRA, because of HIPAA, Hopkins could not connect us. There were 30 of us. And especially like clergy, once we have an experience, we want to, and it's positive, we want other people to have it. And we're good at that. If we find something that we want to share, we were good at sharing it. And once I popped my head up, people started finding me. And then we started meeting with the other people in the study. And for many of those people, I was the first person they talked to about this outside their own families. I did have a friend that was in the study with me, another Episcopal priest, so I had somebody to talk to about it. But even my friends who had done a lot of psychedelics in college or in their 20s, it was like they didn't really understand. They were like, oh yeah, shapes and the wall breeze or weird colors and things. But very few people in their 20s or teens that worked with psychedelics, in my experience, that had these sort of profound religious and spiritual experiences. And here I was at 51, lifelong Christian, very active as layperson, went to seminary in my mid 30s, and then 15 years of parish work, 25 years of spiritual direction. My spiritual pump was well primed. And I think, which really speaks to the need for preparation, discernment first. I mean, Hopkins really taught me a lot about discernment on this. They were looking at me to see if I was ready, and they were encouraging me to do my own discernment about it when I was all in. And since then I'm going to stop, and I really do want to start open up a conversation. So April 21, we started Ligare. I just started going to every psychedelic conference. Did lots of online things, podcasts and conferences with other psychedelic organizations. I would go to psychedelic conferences in my clergy collar, which was very confusing to psychedelic people, but had some of the best conversations around that. It was really helpful, I think, at the time to do that. And I think the psychedelic community, there's some, I think some of it legitimate, some of it not, resistance to the Christian tradition because the church has done some damage to people. and has not been that open to these experiences. And I think some suspicion in the Christian community, a lot of suspicion in the Christian community, that it's a shortcut or it's not valid or you're just doing drugs. And yet I'm here to tell you there are a lot of current Christian lay people, lots of clergy, lots of seminary folks, lots of people that are coming across Jesus or Mary Magdalene or the Holy Spirit, often without any real connection to it. I just talked to a woman in Santa Fe who had no real Christian formation at all, a very non-religious family. And her first ayahuasca experience, she had this incredible experience of the risen Christ. And she baptized herself in the Rio Grande. She didn't know what else to do. So, and that's the sort of thing that I want the church to see is there is real potential to support, not to get new Christians, although that's fine, but to support people in their spiritual journey. I think the best of the Christian tradition, the best of the Jewish tradition, the best of the Muslim tradition, the best of the Buddhist tradition has incredible resources for discernment and for meaning making and for community and for harm reduction and for just for, I think I know my own Christian formation, my own Christian community, my own work as an ordained person was scaffolding around my experience, in addition to the support that I got at Hopkins and from my Jungian analysts and from my spiritual director. So I think I always say that all of that needs to be in place, I think, for people to have the fullness of that experience and to not go off the rails, which there's always the potential with these powerful substances to have experiences that aren't necessarily edifying, or at least not at the beginning. So support's really important. Spiritual, pastoral support, clinical support for people that need that, all of that. I think we've got multiple prongs and multiple structures that need to be in place. And we are in 2025, and lots of people are working with psychedelics in the underground and the above ground. I was just in New Mexico because they've recently legalized psilocybin, and the biggest conversation now is spirituality and pastoral support for people. It's in some ways, I think people have figured out in a lot of ways the clinical needs, and the clinical scaffolding needs to be in place for people, especially that are dealing with real serious mental health issues. But I think that maybe for a lot of us that aren't maybe dealing with real serious clinical issues, this work can be done in more of a communal setting. I mean, I really do think that. And so I think that's enough. That's enough of me yammering on. I want to open up the conversation and hear from anybody, but especially the people that are really deep into the process thought, to see what resonates or what I need to be thinking about, honestly.
Yeah, well, thank you. Thank you so much, Hunt. That's just such an interesting journey. And I love hearing about people's spiritual journeys.
I know.
This topic is so of the moment. I mean, people have just become so curious. And in fact, I'll mention, and if Bill Richards is on the call and listening, I don't recall anything that about his name at that time, but at that time that those studies were being recruited for, I tried to get in,
I know you told me.
but I wasn't. I consider myself a religious leader because I'm a theologian,
Right.
and I think I was still in Claremont then,
Mm-hmm.
but I was not leading a congregation or anything
Right.
like that, so they turned me down.
Oh no, I'm sorry.
But
No.
but yeah, it's fascinating. And you may also, I think I mentioned to you in our conversation, there's a philosopher named Peter Stostedt Hughes who is at Exeter in the UK, has been doing
Yes.
a lot of work around really claiming that this process framework is such a great structure or scaffolding, like you said, to interpret
Yes.
psychedelic experience, that it
Yes.
really holds that experience. And I would just, I'm there's a lot that could be, and I definitely want to hear. I'd like to John Buchanan to chime in if in a moment too, because I know he's written a book about
I know.
that involves this as well. But from my own perspective, just the first thing I would say in terms of process theology is that our sense of God is omnipresent, as God is in every moment and in our physical and spiritual embodied experience. And so, there's again that is a great way of understanding and connecting with, like, how is it that you are able to have experienced the Holy Spirit, God in your body, and have those energies in your body. Well, here's a way to think about that if God
Right.
is in every moment of experience, then of course, why wouldn't we be able to have that experience?
Exactly. And
um,
I think that's the nub. That's probably the nub, one of the nubs, or of where I think process theology, process thought, it's like, because it's just right there. I mean, the experience is right there. And it's not like I'd not had experiences of God. I had. I don't think I certainly wouldn't have gone to seminary at 35 if I hadn't. I'd had him in church and out of church. So it wasn't a completely new, but the intensity of it and the newness of it after I say once I went to seminary and became responsible for a congregation, I would say it's less about seminary, more about the responsibility of a congregation, and with all the pressures that all religious leaders have now, I've really just moved into this very, not even like obsession about what can I read, what conference can I go to figure this out. Like, instead of remembering that I got into this because I'd had these profound experiences of God. I was pretty far removed from it. I hate to admit, but I was about 8 years removed from those experiences
mhm.
after the responsibility of institutional maintenance. So,
Yeah, yeah, right. And
yeah.
like you, I so relate to what you had to say about being more in your head and less in the body and less in the heart. I was the same way for
Mm,
most of my life due to, a very traumatic early life. And who wants to be in the body when the body is the site of all the
right,
trauma that's
right,
experienced? So I
exactly.
too was like stuck in my head for most of my life and was on this quest to recover more of my embodiment and have that experience. And so, like you, my own experiences with mushrooms have been very much about the body and the spirit in the body,
Yes.
and very profound, just very
Yeah.
profound experiences. So but anyway, let's open this up to some other comments and questions and discussion. Wendy, I saw your hand jump right up there.
Hey, friend.
My worlds are just colliding right now. So I have to I'll be try to go really fast because it's like a pinball machine. So I was ordained in 2015. I read some process theology in seminary and liked it, but found myself in Portland, Oregon, um, during COVID as a chaplain at the VA, and my specialty was trauma and spiritual care. And during that time, I was a part of a book group with Anna Jaqua, who's David Ray Griffith's widow now. And she mentioned, we were reading Rita Nakashima Brock's and Rebecca Parker's Saving Paradise,
Mm.
game changer for me. And Anna mentioned Seminary of the Wild in the Wild Church Network. And because Sherry, I know you just finished
Yeah,
interviewing Victoria,
yeah,
and you interviewed her and she interviewed you.
right.
And one night, Hunt was the guest speaker while I was in that year-long program.
Huh.
The scales fell from my eyes. Why am I living in Oregon? Trauma. I'm interested in new models of church. I could no longer go to church at that point. Anyway, went to UC Berkeley's training program and do a lot of work with Ligare now. I'm one of their spiritual directors.
Mm.
And also an eco-spiritual director through Seminary of the Wild now. But I just want to say one of the groups that I've been leading for a year and a half, one of the people in the group was talking a lot about her theological wrestlings around Christianity and psychedelics. And I talked to her about process theology. She'd never heard of it. And
Mm.
you know who this is. I just want to respect her privacy, but it changed her life. I mean, this comes up so much. And I think that a lot of people who are in this space are looking for a different lens and they just haven't been exposed to process Um, and then I'll just close it by sharing a link. Earlier today, I was planning with another chaplain a retreat up in Oregon for religious professionals. And how do we create a week-long retreat setting with psilocybin ceremonies in a Christian context? In this case, there are Jewish retreats happening and interfaith retreats happening through this organization as well. So I commend that to people to spread the word. Um, I think that's everything I wanted to, but I thank you, Hunt, for your leadership in
Oh
this.
God, thank you.
And Sherry, yours too. I miss doing the Christian pop-up because I lead an interfaith psychedelic
Oh,
integration circle at the same
oh,
time every month where
yeah.
I recognize faces. And John, I loved your book. Thank you so much for that contribution.
Yeah, it was Wendy that told me about the book, about John's book. So yeah,
Oh,
I
okay.
tell a lot of people about
I
it. So
know it's good. Yeah,
Wendy, what was the organization that does the retreats?
I'll pop it in
Okay,
the
put
yeah.
it in the
Please take
chat.
a look at that. It's the Sherry Eckhart Foundation, and it's really a remarkable opportunity for
Wow,
people. So
wonderful. Okay, well, who else wants to jump in? John, I saw Tom Ord is on the call. Who else wants to offer some?
yeah, please. Like I told Sherry, I'm here to learn. I'm here to learn too.
Yeah,
So
Kathleen can bring in the poetry and the aesthetics part of this. Jared.
Yeah, a year and a half ago, sometime, I gave a presentation for a conference looking at what Islamic spirituality may have to offer for psychedelic journeys, the contemporary psychedelic community. And I'd be interested in your own kind of reflection from your own faith tradition on what do you think the Christian tradition or Episcopal tradition specifically may have to offer for even people outside of it who are engaging in
yeah,
psychedelic
well,
practices.
yeah. Thank you, Jared. First of all, I mean, just at a real basic level, at the foundation level, I think Scripture is a resource. I really think Christian Scripture, both the Old Testament and the New Testament, have lots of non-ordinary states of consciousness that seem to
Yeah.
be revealed. And I mean, aside from the fact that probably the whole book of Revelation could be a textbook or a resource for psychedelics, I think so here it's interesting how Christian stories will come up in people's journeys. I've had a little bit of that, but there are a lot of people that have an experience of Mary Magdalene or an experience. So I talk about the transfiguration sometimes when people say, I felt like I was with God, maybe not on a mountaintop. I feel like I was with God. And then I say, well, there is this story about Jesus and some of the disciples like on a mountain and they don't want to leave. And like you had this experience, this profound encounter with God, but for example, with mushrooms, and we got to go back down the mountain. We got to go back down and haul water and chop wood and do our ministries, whatever they, broadly understood. We got to do our work in the world. So you can't stay in that space, which I think is good. It's good advice. Like have these experiences and then come back down and see what the fruits of those are, because it's a fun experience. I mean, it can be a fun or a difficult experience, but I think for those of us that are interested in the religious and spiritual life, let's say, what are the fruits of that experience? How is your life different? How do you see the world differently now? And how is that impacting what you're doing? So I just think those kind of basic Christian questions about meaning and experience. And so there's that. Then I think there's the rich tradition of mysticism in Christianity that so many people sadly are not aware of. The way Christianity has been presented in the last 50 years or longer is frankly unchristian, but it's not the fullness of it. So people that have come from more really extreme Protestant traditions or fundamentalism uh, don't know anything about Christian mysticism. So point them to Julian or Thomas Merton or I mean all of them. Um, Hildegard, for example. I mean, there's so many people, so many mystics. Paul, I think you could point to Paul as the church's first mystic and look at his experiences. Whether I frankly don't care if they were on I don't think they were on psilocybin, but however he got there, he was having out of body, non-ordinary experiences. The third heaven. I mean, his experience on the road to Damascus. So many stories in Scripture. Uh, can be a real resource for people. and a real, I think, an affirmation that these experiences have spiritual validity, but also real experience, real spiritual possibility. So it's a long answer to a short question, but I think the Christian tradition and the Jewish tradition and the Muslim tradition and all of Hinduism, Buddhism, I think there's some, but for in the West and in the United States and in Europe, most of us have a Christian background. And whether we know it or like it or not, Christianity is infused into our literature and our music and our culture. So let's find the good parts in it and mine those for our own, for the benefit of the world. So if Christianity is, unless we've got another tradition that we practice, I would say in the West, start here. So
yeah. I also think about just the whole emphasis on healing and liberation. And when you think about the bondage, I mean, like the story of the Gerasene demoniac, you know, when the people are in such bondage to their, whether it be trauma or, you know, self-destructive behaviors or beliefs, that when we can, something like this kind of an intervention can free people from that bondage.
Right.
That's, you know, as Christian as it gets.
Oh my God. Yeah. And I mean, I think, I mean, the reason this research has happened at Hopkins, why it's continuing to happen now all over the country and the world, is because of the healing that people are getting from these almost impossible PTSD with lots of people, depression. And even I was working with a therapist on some anxiety. I didn't mention this. So Hopkins did all kinds of psychological and physical screening. So I passed those fine, but I was working on with some anxiety with my therapist. And the next morning after that first session, I woke up and was in the hotel lobby writing my report. And I thought something's missing. I'm like, oh my God, that knot of anxiety that I carried with me was gone. It literally was gone. And I mean, anxiety comes back, but I now have such a different relationship with it. I can see it. So that's the heal. And as I say a lot really, and I just didn't say it this today, was especially when I'm speaking to Christian, really kind of maybe traditional Christian audiences about this. I say the church has always committed to the healing ministry of the church goes way back, and it's connected to the healing ministry of Jesus. And the church used to build hospitals and train nurses and doctors and all the things. And we don't do that now so much, but we have pastoral care teams, and healing and liberation are key to the Christian message and practice. And if the church doesn't care about the healing that's coming from psychedelics often through spiritual experiences, then what in the hell are we doing?
Right.
I mean,
right.
It's a little provocative, but shut the damn doors if the church doesn't care about healing. Like,
right.
Honestly, I really do think that. I know that.
Yeah.
So
100%.
Thanks for giving me my little platform. But I think that's an important for really, again, for traditional Christian people who are a little skeptical about this, is to point to the science and say, my God, look at this. Hear the stories from soldiers, rape victims, people that have thought they were suicidal and are getting addiction, alcoholics, and opioid addicts. I mean, it's incredible. So just be curious, less judgment, more curiosity. That's what I say a lot to Christians too. So to my fellow Christians. So
I see John's got his hand raised. You want to jump in here, John?
I would just briefly, I hope. Thank you, Hunt. That was terrific. Very even-handed. One can get out of control with psychedelics, so and scare some people off. So that was a very nice presentation there.
Thank you.
I was thinking of a few things. Do you know Lenny and Elizabeth Gibson at all?
No.
Lenny wrote the first article I saw in Process Studies on psychedelics from a white-handed perspective, and the two of them he was in a holotropic training group at the same time as I was, and he and his wife are trying to promote holotropic breath work, as along similar lines. But I bring him up because he's argued that pastoral counselors are the ideal people to work with psychedelic sessions, and he's quite a bright fellow. So I think I like his observations. Secondly, I was wondering if if you're in touch at all with Matthew Fox with his cosmic mass thing, it seems so perfect.
Oh my God, sort of tangentially. So I was, and I'm working on it, but about a month ago, I wrote this. I went through some stuff with the Episcopal Church and ended up resigning my ordination. And on the anniversary of my ordination, 20-year anniversary of my ordination, I was in England for the Greenbelt Festival, and I was with the Muslim participant in the study. Had lunch with her, and I came back and I read Matthew Fox had written a essay on the study I was in, and which was the first I'd heard of his own interest in that. And I had a while back had read a quote from him that the archetype of the priesthood is the midwife of grace. I mean, the church has this whole idea of ordination, but I think more in line with the priesthood of all believers, that archetypal energy or archetype is available to all of us and any of us that are bringing grace into the world are priests. I mean, I really do believe that. And so I think Matthew Fox is, and his book on the chakras, actually. So that book on the chakras was, do you know that book?
I don't.
I think it's Original Blessing. But in that book, he's got a whole, he takes the seven deadly sins, but the seven blessings, and connects them to each of the seven chakras and to each of the seven sacraments of the church. And one of the things that happened to me in that, so Matthew Fox, I really do need to get to him, because I would like to talk to him, but a year after I was in that study, I was telling a former Pentecostal friend of mine about it, and he had studied with Matthew Fox, and he recommended that book. And in that first journey I had, I felt this blockage. I felt a blockage in my throat. I'm sorry I didn't mention this because it's important. I felt this blockage in my throat that I felt like my Adam's apple was going to explode. And my guide touched me on the shoulder, and that increased the energy dramatically. And then it moved on out and out the top of my head. I knew I'd heard the word chakra. I had some vague awareness, but my friend said, you should read Matthew. I told him that story. He said, you should read Matthew Fox's book. The sacrament that he connects to the throat chakra is ordination. And that's really about leadership and spiritual community. It's not necessarily about what the church does, but it's about being a midwife of grace. And I thought, oh my God, I had felt so blocked as a preacher that my throat, so there was just something in all that, a lot in all that wove a bunch of strands together. And that book on that book is really worth reading. It's really more of a kind of a manual. You don't have to read it. You can just use it as a resource. But yeah, so John, thank you for that too. There's so much. I think what they're doing at the Center for Action and Contemplation and Richard Rohr, although not directly connected to psychedelics, is introducing people to this whole other part of Christianity. I think what Ilia Delio's doing, and with Teilhard and with her own work, and certainly Matthew Fox, the Cosmic Mass. Yeah, I think I have a sense that there's some psychedelic connection and all that. I'm just not sure exactly, but I think there probably is. Maybe not necessarily directly with Matthew Fox, but in that community, there seems to be something.
May I also just mention at the end of David Griffin's Parapsychology, Philosophy, and Spirituality, wonderful book. He says that basically the Protestant church, except for some evangelical branches that still have something energizing going on, that unless they bring in things related to basically to non-ordinary experience, they're gone.
Yeah, well,
and also just mention a book you might enjoy by him, which is relatively short, is Two Great Truths.
Okay.
Where he goes into what science missed and what religion missed, and how what each of them missed, they each need from each other and can come back together. And it's written for, I think, a church up in Michigan originally, so it's
accessible,
user friendly.
Yeah,
unlike some of David Griffin's books.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you for that. Yeah, that's exciting. That's again, I one of the reasons I was excited about this is I knew I would get some new ideas and new resources. And thank you, John.
Are we pretty close to having LSD being handed out in church? Anything now? Is that happening?
I don't think any church on no, and I'm not sure that'd be a very good idea. But
No.
All right, just psilocybin then.
Yeah, well, I always here's what I would say with that right now is I don't. This is not a Sunday morning, although UDV and Santo Daime do it in the context of liturgy, so I think in that way. But I think for most Christians, for many Christians, I think it's a retreat. That's why this thing that Wendy mentioned for in Oregon for a legal experience in the context of a Christian retreat, and then to go to the service center for 2 sessions. I think that's a model. Rupert Sheldrake, on a conversation I had with him a while back, said the traditional Christian churches ought to outsource their psychedelic experiences to Santo Daime and let them handle that, let them offer that, and then bring them back to the Presbyterian or the Episcopal Church and then see what happens. We probably wouldn't get them back, so maybe maybe not, maybe not. But and Karl Rahner said the Christian of the future will be a mystic or won't exist at all.
Yeah.
So I think that's all. Pentecostals get that. Pentecostal Christians get it. And yet I think there's, because of the kind of theology that doesn't, it's such a, in some ways, a very narrow theology, even though the experiences are broad.
Yeah.
Pentecostalism would be a lot. And that's why my friend that I was talking to that recommended Matthew Fox he said that and he'd not done psychedelics, but he said that feels like a technology. It feels like a spiritual technology, like music or light are in the Pentecost. People get worked into these non-ordinary states, like in holotropic breath work too. I mean, you get it worked into these experiences with music and rhythm and lights, and you can have the exact same experience. So I if you did a brain scan of Pentecostals at the peak of an experience and people on psilocybin, it'd be interesting to see where the overlap was.
That would be interesting.
I bet there is some. I bet there is some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I see Tom Roberts is raising his hand. Thank you, John.
Yeah, thanks, John. All right, Tom.
Thank you. There are 2 items I think that people in this group would want to know about. Is that the United Church of Christ, also known as Congregational, has a movement on to introduce psychedelics to the laity and the clergy. And the movement is composed of both laity and clergy. And they had presented a program at the last synod meeting, although they missed it by a little chance, but are going to be submitting it next year. Yeah. And the way to get in touch with them is a Facebook page is called God is Still Working. God is Still Speaking. It's Facebook, God is Still Speaking. Actually tomorrow afternoon, there's a meeting of those of us who are in this. So if you hurry up, I can't give you the connection to it right now, but if you go to that, you'll find it. The other is a book I'm sure people in this group would like very much, Psychedelics and Christian Faith. He takes a couple of chapters to talking about the healing ministry, and then spends a lot of it talking about the theology and problems such as how are pastors going to talk with clergy, or clergy going to talk with laity who've had these experiences, and what might they make out of them. It's a very readable book. A lot of books on theology are not readable. This is a guy who knows how to write in a very readable way. Yeah. Again, the Ron Cole Turner is the author. Very readable.
Very, very good book. Well, Tom, your book that you edited was an important resource for me after my experience at Hopkins too. So
what was that book? What is that book?
Yeah, Tom, talk about your book.
Yeah.
Psychedelics and Spirituality.
Yeah.
Oh.
It was the result of a conference that was held in 1995, and it was co-sponsored by Chicago Theological Seminary.
Really?
And Council on Spiritual Practices. Houston Smith was one of the main speakers there.
Wow.
Stan Groff, a lot of other people that you'll know.
Yeah, really important.
It's not a proceedings of the conference. Bob Jesse asked people afterwards, say, what would you write about the topic now, having attended this conference? So it's not one of those terrible philosophical books.
No, it's a great book. It's so helpful to me.
Part of it is the introduction by Brother David Steindl-Rast.
Exactly.
5 pages long. And if you read Brother David's introduction, all the rest of it is just a very, very long footnote on his wonderful introduction.
Wow.
The title is called Psychedelics and Psychedelics and Spirituality, or Spirituality and Psychedelics. I think spirituality is first. It's been a while since I've looked at it. By the way, it's also published in Polish.
Oh, wow. It's a beautiful book. The cover is gorgeous.
Yeah, it is. It's the third. It's the third cover of it. It's coming.
Yeah,
it's
it's
the
I
third
know
printing
it's
of it.
yeah.
So
Yeah, Tom.
it's
Yeah.
called. Thank you.
Yeah.
This has been a wonderful group. I've knew nothing at all about process thinking until I happened to run across this group.
Yeah,
So
I'm glad. I know.
it's been
I saw
wonderful
you.
for me.
Yeah, good.
Well, we
Yes.
hope you come back for more things, Tom. In fact, actually, I'll mention we've already got scheduled for November another event with professor at Naropa named Travis Cox, who's going to be talking kind of about a similar topic, but kind of looking at like oh, I forget what we're calling it, but it's like eco-psychology, holistic spirituality, and plant medicine, or something like that. So he's going to be coming at this topic from a slightly different perspective, but that'll be in November.
I'm very narrow in my interest, and I'm interested in things only if they have to do with psychedelics. That's a pretty broad, narrow.
Yeah, that covers a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you, Tom.
Thank you, Tom. Matthew Cobb, can you unmute and jump on in?
Yes, I can.
Great.
I'm coming because I'm really interested in the power of suggestion, and I know Bill Richards is on this call, and I'm really curious how that went 10 years ago in that lab at Johns Hopkins.
You mean if people are having experiences due to suggestibility?
Correct. Because that's one of the considerations in the research.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if Bill wants to comment.
I could.
Yeah,
there's Bill, there's Bill.
please jump in.
Hello, everyone.
Hello. Honored to have you join us.
I think the whole idea that suggestion influences content, whether the music or the belief systems of the medical staff or therapists, I really don't think that carries much weight. I know from years and years of experience that when we hold the set and setting constant, there's an incredible variety of experiences that are reported. And at Hopkins, we always evoked the participants' own words to describe what happened. I mean, there's some things they can find in the literature if they want of Wally Pankey's definition of mystical consciousness, but we don't pre-program that, you know. And good atheists have profound religious experiences quite often, and some very devout religious leaders sometimes spend their whole sessions with working through childhood psychological traumas or whatever, you know. And I remember a Roman Catholic priest who wanted to see the beatific vision. And while the Kyrie of the Bach B minor Mass was playing, he was reliving childhood sexual abuse. Okay. That those things, there's a entelechy, a meaningful unfolding of content for each person in each session. And whether there's a statue of the Buddha in the room really doesn't make any difference. You know?
Interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it kind of reminds me actually of, I just got back from going to Chicago to the International Association of Near-Death Studies conference, where I was on a panel about dreams. And it kind of reminds me of a lot of NDE experiencer stories where people who have, I mean, yes, there is many cases where people sort of get what they expect in terms of who they encounter, but in other stories, it's not at all who they expected to encounter or what they expected. You know, an atheist will encounter Jesus, or a, you know, anyway, it can be very, very different. And even in my own case, you know, I was sort of yearning also, like Billy, like you're talking about, I was kind of yearning to have an encounter of some kind with, you know, a divine source, being Jesus, somebody, you know, somebody
Somebody show up.
somebody
Somebody
show
show
up
up.
here. And it was all internal, it was all from within me, and I know that that's what I needed. You know, that's, I needed to not have it be an external.
That's right. We often hear, I didn't experience what I wanted, I experienced what I needed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a wisdom within us
Yes.
that choreographs the content.
Yeah.
Yeah. I definitely see that. I mean, you see that especially in retrospect, of where looking back on it, to see that I needed everything that happened to get me out of the rut I was in, to expand my own sense of my purpose, and to bring my gifts in a way, to bring my gifts and interests to a conversation, right? Really, I think is having probably more effect than I did at a local church. Yeah. And Bill's book, Sacred Knowledge, which I did not read until after the experience, is also a recommended book that comes out of his own deep, long time experience. Some of the stories he mentioned are in there, but Sacred Knowledge, that's in Polish and a bunch of other languages too, Bill, I think.
Yeah, it's out
Yeah.
in 10 translations right now, even
Wow.
Chinese, you know.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, Sacred Knowledge, well worth getting to. So we've got John's book, we've got Tom's, the book he edited. Ron Cole Turner's book is really very accessible. He's written it for people working, I think a lot of just clergy people that are needing to, a lot of people want to know more about psychedelics, and I think the purpose of his book is to educate religious leaders about how to talk about it and how to think about it.
And there are many good books being written right now.
They are coming.
Jamie
Yes.
Clark Souls.
Jamie's book is coming. Yeah. Yeah.
I had one last question
Okay. Hey, Matt.
about integration, and I'm of the mind that it's lifelong, but in a clinical trial you can't do that. So I totally get that. But Hunt, Bill, anyone, um, I'm running with 3 years. That's my ongoing study for myself as a citizen scientist. 3 years integration from a therapeutic dose journey. Is there any merit to this 36 months, you know, a long haul for integration?
We always differentiate between initial integration and long-term integration. You know, sometimes there's insights that you want to implement right away, and you know, I promised I was going to call Aunt Agatha, and now I'm really going to do it. but the big integration continues as long as we live, and we need good communities to support that.
Yes, we do.
Churches could.
Yeah. For example, I don't know, like churches, synagogues.
Yeah.
Like, I don't know, where are the
Or
communities?
monasteries.
Monasteries. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely monasteries. Yeah.
Well, I know we're technically out of time, but Kathleen, I think I saw that you had your hand raised. Do you want to ask a question before we close? Oh, you're still muted. There you are. Wait.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay. I'm trying to decide whether to pass because this is not a simple question, but this is fascinating to me. I'm very interested in mysticism. I am a poet. And some people who read my work will say, oh, you're a mystic. And I go, I'm not a mystic. I'm just writing this stuff. But anyway, I had a very, very horrific experience with psychedelics when I was much younger. that were given surreptitiously to me after a traumatic experience. And it was probably the worst night of my life. I thought, I had a brother who was schizophrenic, and I thought I had turned schizophrenic and I would be that way forever. So this is interesting to me, but I don't think I'm ever going to be able to participate in this. I don't know what it would take for someone to, help me do that. And part of me says, that's okay.
Yeah.
That's really okay. And
Definitely.
yet I'm fascinated. So my question is, for those of us who can't do this, how do we benefit from this sort of means of grace for you all? You know what I mean? Or what can I take from what other, I mean, the question then is, how does one open oneself to experiences that are this mind expanding? If I'm certainly interested in the experiences that people have had, but it's almost like you feel like I'm outside of this and I'm going to be outside of this. And I'm not close to it, but I think that's probably the case, and that's okay. So
Yeah.
does that question make sense? Because I think there's going to be a lot
Yeah.
of people.
Yeah,
There's
Bill,
going to be actually
Let me
most people.
just say a
Most people
couple
will
quick
not. Yeah.
words, you know,
Yeah.
if it's okay. I don't want to
sure.
Yeah.
No, Bill, please.
Yeah,
dominate
go ahead,
each
Bill.
other. But psychedelics, as I view them, are powerful tools if they're wisely used. But the experiences aren't in the drug, they're in us. Okay. And there are many other ways of accessing those experiences. The whole plethora of meditative techniques,
Yeah.
the runner's high, creative fervor, sensory isolation, sensory overload, natural childbirth, exceptional sexual experiences, perhaps, there are, and sometimes these experiences just happen in the middle of the night to people who never even knew there was such a thing, And maybe we generate more DMT sometimes than others. Allegedly, we're all generating a little bit all the time. So we're all in violation of federal law. And um, it and it's important to stress it's not just having the experience, it's integrating the experience, no matter how it comes about. How do you apply those insights? It's easy to love all mankind, and loving the people you're working with might be more challenging.
Right.
We have integrating to do.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question, Kathleen.
Yeah, thank you. I think John mentioned holotropic breath work too.
Yep.
I mean, again, some of us, I think I needed something dramatic. I've been meditating for a long time. I needed to be ejected out of my rut, my spiritual rut. And I think a lot of us are there. I was certainly there at 51. And I've never felt that again. So, one of the worst things somebody can do to somebody is to give them a substance like LSD without telling them. And schizophrenia is one of the contraindicated conditions. So, I'm sorry. And your poetry, and that's the fruit of something deep and spiritual, deeply spiritual and deeply expansive. And why do you resist being called a mystic? Why do you resist being called a mystic?
Well, I think I'm consciously inventing things sometimes. Not necessarily that they're coming. I know you can say, oh, it's God is always working in us and all of that, but I do think as human beings we can be self-consciously
creating,
and it's not really
that's good. That makes sense.
It's not really, we're not really being receptive or conscious of something. it's a hard thing to put into words.
It's an extra step. Like the creative act might be an extra step beyond, because you're actually creating some thing, like a thing, and an art object or a piece of creative work. So yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's
you always question the validity of it, the truthfulness of it. There's a lot of self-consciousness in it. So it's worth questioning it.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that question too, because I don't think, and obviously Bill's answer was really
thank you.
Cool. Yeah.
Very helpful. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all.
That flew by. My God, that flew by.
I know. I looked at the clock and I was like, how is it already 9 o'clock? My goodness. But yeah, time flies when you're having fun.
Yeah, exactly.
But let's give Hunt a big hand and waves of thankfulness. I'm so grateful for you and for your content this evening. Conversation. Really good stuff, Hunt. And
I'm glad to have this connection. It feels maybe right on schedule, but it's really important. So I'll get more involved with what you're doing too, because I really see the connections. And
and I definitely would like to stay in touch. And
we will. We will.
Further possibilities.
We will.
Yes.
Thanks everybody that came on. I knew a few people on here, but thanks everybody that came on.
Yeah, we appreciate you and glad we're spending your evening with us, and we hope you'll return for other things down the road.